The cold November wind didn't bite. It pressed in slowly, heavy like truth. Layla Monroe stepped onto the sidewalk outside Mercy Children's Clinic, envelope in hand, her coat too thin for the season. But she didn't shiver. She couldn't. Inside that envelope was a diagnosis. Not a guess, not a "we'll monitor it," a name for everything that had been happening to her sons. The unexplained fatigue, the infections, the way Kamari sometimes slept through dinner, the pale tone under Khalil's eyes, despite all the multivitamins and soups she forced into their mornings. They were only 8. Twins. Her entire world split into 2 wide, curious smiles. She'd done everything to protect them. Nutritious meals, after-school routines, reading before bed. But this didn't listen to bedtime prayers or organic food. This had lived quietly in their blood, waiting. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't breaking, but because she didn't have time. By the time she got home, Kamari was building a Lego set, and Khalil had spilled juice on his spelling worksheet. Her life didn't pause for grief. They didn't know yet. She didn't know how to tell them. That night, after putting the boys to bed and finishing 2 hours of freelance nutrition consults on her laptop, she called Dr. Singh back. "There's a trial," the specialist had said. "It's early stage, but promising. Gene therapy with custom immune modulation. Only 50 spots across the country." Layla's heart twisted. "Where?" "Callahan Biotech is leading it. They've opened 5 slots here in Chicago. I'll put your name in." She didn't respond right away. The line went quiet. Then Dr. Singh asked, "Layla, is something wrong?" She answered with honesty and restraint. "No, I've heard the name." What she didn't say, I used to love the man behind it. The next morning, Layla dressed carefully. Dark jeans, navy blouse, gold studs her mother once gave her, hair in a clean bun. Her armor wasn't glamour. It was control. Callahan Biotech's Chicago branch sat like a mirrored monolith at the edge of the loop. Too polished, too silent. A building made for billionaires who forgot what hospital hallways felt like. She waited in the trial intake room, surrounded by worn parents with hope in their hands. She didn't scan the hallway for Nate. She told herself she wouldn't. But when her name was called and she walked through the glass door into the meeting room, the breath she held escaped in silence. He was there, charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled slightly up. He used to do that during finals. Nathaniel Callahan looked up from the file in his hand. He stilled. "Did she, Layla?" Her voice was calm. "Hi, Nathan." 10 years dissolved in that moment. Not because she wanted it to, but because memory doesn't care about time. He stood, nodded to the seat across from him. "You're here for the trial." She sat. "My sons, both diagnosed last week." He didn't interrupt as she spoke. She explained their symptoms, the progression, the fear. When she finished, she could see the way his eyes focused. Not emotionally, but analytically, like he was building equations with the facts. She remembered that part, too. After a long pause, he said, "I don't oversee most trials personally anymore." "I didn't come for you," she replied. "I came for the science." That landed somewhere between them, like a stone. He flinched, but not visibly, just in the eyes. He nodded, understood. He reviewed their records in silence. "We don't typically allow two children from the same family in the same trial," he said finally. "There are ethical guidelines about risk and equity of access." Layla leaned forward, tone firm. "Their DNA is nearly identical. If it works on one, it should work on the other. If it fails on one, I need to know for both. I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for logic." He didn't push back. "I'll take it to the board," he said. She stood. "Thank you." At the door, he spoke again, softly. "You haven't changed." She turned. "I did. You just weren't there to see it." 2 days later, her boys were accepted. Not with Nathaniel's signature, but she didn't ask if he had anything to do with it. She wasn't 17 anymore. She didn't need closure. She needed solutions. Still, as the appointments began, as her sons started their blood work and testing schedules, as she filled out health logs and calmed Kamari during his first scan, she noticed something. Nate was there. Not always close. Not in the room. Nearby. He didn't speak much. He asked the nurses questions, sat in on briefings, gave notes to the trial coordinator. And once, just once, she caught him watching Khalil draw superheroes on the edge of his patient form. There was a flicker of something in his expression. A memory, maybe. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. That Friday, as they ate lunch outside the facility, Kamari whispered, "That man knows weird stuff." Khalil added, "Yeah, like how to hack a computer and fold hospital gowns." Layla glanced up. Nathaniel was sitting 2 benches away, reading something on his tablet. Hearing his name and hospital gowns in the same sentence nearly made her laugh. When their eyes met, he raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. They observe. Like their mother, he gave the smallest smile. "I was an intern once. Learned how to fold and code in the same week." That night, when Kamari's fever spiked unexpectedly, the hospital called her. She rushed in, heart pounding. Nate was already there. Hair slightly undone, tie gone. He sat outside the exam room, leaning against the wall, eyes tired. "You didn't have to stay," she said. He didn't look up. "I did." Layla stared at him for a long moment, then sat beside him. No words, just the weight of knowing they were no longer strangers. But something else yet either. Kamari's fever broke by morning. The attending physician called it a standard immune response. But nothing about this felt standard to Layla. Not the pacing, not the oxygen monitor, not the way she hadn't slept for 36 hours. She stood at the foot of Kamari's hospital bed as the nurse adjusted his fourth. He was pale but breathing steadily, curled on his side, hugging the faded lion plushie his grandma gave him before she passed. Layla didn't look at Nathan until they were in the hallway again. "You stayed all night." He was leaning against the wall. Same suit, same shoes. No sign he'd gone home. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "You haven't been in that room once since I got here." "I know." She watched him carefully. "You're different." He didn't smile. "So are you." They moved to the hospital lounge. Dim lights, weak coffee, a pile of health brochures no one ever picked up. They sat across from each other, an open manila folder between them. Her hands rested over the paperwork. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest. "So," he said, "2 boys. You didn't list their father's information on the intake form." "There's nothing to list," she said without flinching. "You did it alone?" "I didn't have a choice. But yes." He nodded slowly. "And their names?" he asked. "Kamari and Khalil." "They have your eyes." "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes they have my mouth, especially when they're annoyed." He almost smiled at that, but the silence that followed wasn't easy. Nate cleared his throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her gaze didn't soften. "You left." "I left Chicago. You left me." His voice dropped. "I didn't leave you. I followed an investor's timeline. I thought you understood." Layla leaned back. "I was 21, working 2 jobs and nursing my mother. I wasn't trying to understand a man chasing legacy. I was trying to survive." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence between them. She exhaled. "You never wrote." "I didn't know what to say." "You didn't know what you'd done." His eyes lifted. "I knew, but I saw your face in an article a few years ago, a feature on single mothers in healthcare. You looked strong, whole. I thought maybe I only messed that up." She scoffed softly. "I was whole because I had to be, not because I was healed." She stood. "I didn't come here to reopen old chapters." "Why did you come here?" Layla met his eyes. "Because if you're the man running the company that can save my sons, I have no space for history, only for outcomes." He stood too. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "No, but I still want to help. Not just as CEO, as someone who used to matter to you." That hit something buried, but she didn't show it. "Then help like someone who doesn't need thanks." In the weeks that followed, their lives intertwined again, but without declaration. Nate remained in the periphery. He didn't hover. He watched. He learned. Layla saw the change in him slowly. He didn't take business calls during consultations. He stood beside the nurses during rough injections. He brought puzzles for the boys, not expensive tablets or gadgets, but logic games and memory cards that Kamari loved. One afternoon, when Khalil flinched during a blood draw, Nate knelt beside him and breathed slow until the boy calmed. Layla watched from the corner, her heart tightening. This wasn't the Nate who used to chase perfection. This was a man who paused, noticed, stayed. They started riding down together in the elevator after visits. Quiet, sometimes joking, sometimes not speaking at all. One evening, the elevator stopped between floors. A minor glitch. They stood alone, the hum of silence between them. "I never stopped thinking about you," Nate said suddenly. Layla didn't answer right way. When she finally spoke, it was low. "You don't know me anymore. I want to." She turned toward the elevator doors. "This isn't the time. I'm not asking for second chance." "Then what are you asking for?" He hesitated. "To matter. In whatever way is safe for you." She looked at him then, and instead of giving him an answer, she gave him a truth. "Safety isn't a word I use lightly anymore." The elevator jolted, then resumed. When the doors opened, they both stepped out. Later that week, Layla found a stack of printed documents in her hospital mailbox. Summarized research, plain language, simplified visuals about the treatment cycle. Nate's initials were scrawled on the back. A note: "Didn't want you to rely on medical jargon alone." She folded the papers, placed them in her tote, and said nothing. But something cracked open in her that night. Not love, not trust, just possibility. 12 years ago, they sat in a shared booth at Silver Bean Cafe. Layla Monroe in scrubs, Nathaniel Callahan in a hoodie, still smelling of server rooms and black coffee. "I got the offer," he had said, his fingers drumming the rim of a chipped mug. "San Francisco. They want me on site by March." Layla stirred her tea without looking up. "You knew this, though, chumming." He leaned forward. "I want you to with me." Her spoon clinked against the ceramic. "My mom was diagnosed last month, Nate. Stage 3. I'm not leaving Chicago. Your program's almost done." "And then what? I sit in an apartment alone while you pitch slide decks and sleep 4 hours a night." He didn't answer. She looked at him then, eyes steady. "We don't have a plan, Nate. We have momentum. And momentum isn't a future." Now, standing in Callahan Biotech's neutral-toned conference room, Layla held the same spine. The briefing was full of lab directors and trial supervisors. She sat at the end of the long, oval table. Nate sat halfway down, silent, not leading, not speaking over anyone. The briefing covered dosage shifts, projected responses, immune markers, and nutrition adaptations. She listened, asked questions, took notes. When they called a break, she stepped out early. She didn't expect Nate to follow. Bud did. Outside the room, near the vending machines, he said, "You remember data like muscle memory. I work in pediatric nutrition. Science isn't a past life for me." He nodded. "I didn't mean it that May." She turned slightly toward him. "Why are you attending these meetings yourself? You said you don't manage most trials. Don't? Why this one?" His pause was short, but full. "Because I saw your name." She looked away. He added, "And because it's the first trial we've run that affects children directly. I'm responsible for the outcomes, ethically and financially." Layla folded her arms. "That's noble. It's real. That's the problem, Nate. I don't know what part of you is real anymore." He didn't defend himself. She waited for him to, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "Would you have come if you knew I was still this involved?" "No." "Why did you come?" Layla's answer was immediate. "Because I've learned to show up for my children, even when it costs me peace." Nate's voice dropped. "Then let me show up, too." Later that day, she found a quiet moment on the terrace outside the building. Sunlight fought through clouds. She stared out over the river, letting the cold bite through her coat. She wasn't fragile, but she was tired. Tired of always being the one who stayed, while others chased futures. Tired of managing every detail, while never letting herself ask for help. Tired of pretending she didn't still feel something, anger, grief, or memory, when she looked at Nathaniel Callahan. Back inside, she walked past the waiting area and saw Kamari sitting beside Nate. They were solving a puzzle together. Kamari's face was serious. Nate was helping without taking over. Layla watched from the hallway. She didn't interrupt. That night, at home, she helped Khalil finish homework while Kamari napped on the couch. When he asked who the man was who helped him with the puzzle, Layla said only, "Someone who knew me before you were born." Khalil tilted his head. "Did you like him?" She paused. "I think I trusted him. That's kinda the same." She smiled faintly. "Not always." The next morning, the boys had another round of tests. Khalil had never liked needles, and this time was no different. He squirmed, panicked. One nurse tried soothing him. Another prepped the vial. Layla was about to intervene when Nate entered the room, quiet as breath. He crouched beside Khalil. "Hey," he said gently, "you wanna see something cool?" Khalil sniffed. "Like what?" Nate reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded origami frog. "I used to fold these while I waited for my turn, during my own tests. Did it help?" "It didn't make the needle smaller," Nate said, "but it gave me something to hold." Khalil took the frog. Layla stood frozen in the corner, the nurse watching her for a cue. She gave a small nod. The blood draw happened. Khalil didn't cry. Afterward, the boy asked if he could keep the frog. Nate said, "Only if you promise to fold one for someone else someday." "I will," Khalil whispered. In the hallway afterward, Layla approached Nate. "I didn't know you were scared of needles." He didn't smile. "You never had to see me scared. I never let you. You didn't let me see anything that made you human." He looked at her then, not defensive, just quiet. "I'm trying now." Layla exhaled. "Trying isn't asking for anything back, right?" "No, just asking for room to try." By the end of the third week of the trial, Layla noticed something she hadn't felt in years. Ease. It was subtle, a slow return of something she hadn't expected. The absence of tension in her chest didn't come from certainty. The boys were still under constant observation. There were side effects, risk factors, unknowns. But there was a rhythm now. Morning prep, hospital check-ins, Kamari's questions about the machines, Khalil's new obsession with organizing his charts and stickers, and Nathaniel's quiet, consistent presence. He never inserted himself. He didn't act like a savior. He didn't try to explain away what had happened years ago. He just stayed where he was needed. It disarmed her, but it didn't undo the years. It didn't erase the way she'd held her life together without a single call, visit, or check-in from the man she once imagined might be her future. One evening after tests, Layla sat on the bench outside the facility while the boys chased each other in the small courtyard. Nate came out a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of tea. He didn't ask. He handed her one and sat beside her. "Still remember how you like it?" he asked. She took a sip. "Barely sweet. Extra ginger. I pay attention. Too late to be proud of that." He nodded, accepting the sting. They sat in silence, the kind that was no longer heavy, just full. The wind picked up. She wrapped her coat tighter. Nate offered her his scarf. "I'm fine," she said. "You always say that." "I always mean it. But do you ever rest?" Layla didn't respond. A moment passed. He shifted beside her. "Layla," he said, quiet and deliberate. "Do you ever think about why we ended the way we did?" Her fingers curled around the paper cup. "I think about how fast we were moving back then. You were sprinting toward something. I was trying not to drown. Neither of us paused long enough to ask if we even had the same finish line. You think it would have ended the same way, no matter what?" She looked at him now. "I think you had to become who you are, and I had to become someone who could survive without waiting." Nate didn't argue. "I still wish I'd done some things differently," he said. "So do I," she said. "Do you hate me for it?" "No," Layla said. "I stopped having energy to hate anyone when my boys got sick the first time, and I was up 3 nights straight, making sure Kamari could breathe without coughing up blood." He swallowed hard. That's when I realized, she continued, that heartbreak is luxury. Survival is not. They didn't speak for a while. The boys came running toward them, breathless and smiling. Kamari tripped, scraped his knee, cried a little. Nate knelt without hesitation and checked the wound. Khalil offered a tissue. Layla held her son while he calmed down. And that moment, 3 adults, one shared instinct, no performance, shifted something in her. This wasn't about romance anymore. This was about a man who hadn't run. Not this time. That weekend, Layla stayed in the hospital overnight with the boys. Nate left around midnight, but returned by 7 a.m. with coffee and bagels. She met him in the hallway as he balanced the tray. You didn't have to come this early. I didn't sleep much. She raised an eyebrow. You used to survive on 3 hours. I used to think surviving meant winning. And now? He handed her the coffee. Now, I think survival is only half the story. The other half is who you stay for. Layla looked at the tray. 2 plain bagels for the boys. 1 everything bagel for her. I can't decide if you remember everything or if you've just done your homework. Both. Later, as the boys ate, Nate sat on the floor with them, joking about how everything. Bagels were chaotic circles, and plain ones were bagels with commitment issues. Kamari laughed so hard he nearly choked. Layla watched, heart pinched in a strange way. This wasn't the future she had planned. This wasn't a family the way magazines showed it. But it was something. It was real. That night, while packing the boys' backpacks for their return home, she found a sticky note tucked between the medical charts Nate had left earlier. It read, "I'm not trying to replace anything. I'm just trying to be someone worth remembering this time." Nay, she didn't throw it away. She didn't reply either. But the note went into her bag, right beside the backup inhaler and insurance card. She didn't want to admit what that meant. So she didn't. Monday morning came with snow dusting the curbside, and the scent of antibiotics clinging to Layla's sweater sleeves. By now, she could pack a hospital bag in under 10 minutes. Kamari's sketchbook, Khalil's headphones, matching water bottles, a folder of every test result since the trial began. She didn't ask for help anymore. She moved through every motion like a system. Efficient, precise, guarded. But that morning, as she zipped Khalil's jacket and double-checked Kamari's medicine pouch, she found herself wondering whether Nate had slept. He'd stayed late again the night before. Quietly folded laundry in the corner of their recovery room. No fanfare, no comments, just presence. She hated how much that meant. At the facility, routine took over. Kamari cracked jokes with the receptionist. Khalil insisted on saying hello to the lab tech before getting poked. Nate wasn't there when they arrived. For the first time in 2 weeks. Layla thought she'd feel relieved. But the absence sat heavy. She didn't ask about him, didn't text. She told herself this was normal, that men like Nate had obligations bigger than one trial, one family. But at noon, when she stepped into the cafeteria, there he was, standing by the drink machine, looking almost apologetic. "I had a call this morning," he said. "Didn't mean to disappear." She raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know you were reporting your whereabouts." "I'm not," he said. "I just didn't want them to think I left." Layla held his gaze. "You mean the boys?" He nodded. She sat down. He followed. They ate in companionable silence. The boys were in their session with the trial coordinator. They had 30 uninterrupted minutes. "You don't have to keep coming," she said, not looking at him. "I know you're not responsible for this. I know I'm capable of doing this on my own." "I know," he said again, firmer. "You've been doing it beautifully." That caught her. He didn't smile. He wasn't flattering her. He meant it. Layla shifted in her seat. "Then why do you keep showing up?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I didn't show up for anything that mattered back then. And now I see what I missed." She didn't soften. "I'm not a lesson," she said, "and they're not your redemption story." Nate leaned in slightly. "I'm not here for redemption. I'm here because I finally understand that staying is its own kind of choice." That night, after putting the boys to bed in the guest house, Layla stepped outside to the back patio for air. Nate had left earlier. A text said he had another late meeting. She didn't reply, but as she stood there, wrapped in her old college hoodie, she realized something strange. She missed the sound of his voice. No voice from 10 years ago. But the one he used now, steady, lower, unhurried, the version of him that no longer tried to impress the room, just understand it. The next day, the boys had their longest procedure yet, over 3 hours of testing and scans. Layla waited through most of it, with her eyes on the screen, tracking vitals and murmuring prayers she didn't even finish in her mind. When the door opened and Nate stepped in, holding 2 coffees and a sandwich she didn't know she needed, she exhaled without realizing she'd been holding her breath. "You didn't have to come," she said automatically. "I didn't come for you," he said, then added, "But I'm glad you're here." She stared at the sandwich. Turkey and avocado. "You're predictable," he said, "or you remember everything." He didn't argue. When the boys were wheeled back into recovery, drowsy but stable, Layla stood beside their beds. Nate didn't intrude. He sat in the corner, watching quietly. At one point, Khalil mumbled. He came back. Layla touched his forehead. "Who?" "The man from before." She looked at Nate. Khalil drifted back to sleep. She said nothing. Later that evening, she stepped into Nate's office for the first time since the trial began. It was minimalist. Clean desk. No family photos. Only a framed picture of a prototype from his first patent. Still don't decorate? She asked. Still not home, he said. He poured tea for both of them. Her usual. No sugar. They sat. Nate leaned back. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had stayed? She didn't look away. I used to, and now I think about what happened because you didn't. Thou Thylans wasn't easy, but it was honest. Before she left, Nate walked her to the elevator. The doors opened. She stepped in. He didn't follow. As the doors began to close, she looked at him and said, "Don't try to make this something it's not." "I won't," he replied. "But if it ever becomes something again," she added softly, "don't rush it." He nodded once. "I won't," and the doors shut between them. This time, not with finality, but with understanding. The snow turned to slush by morning, but Layla didn't mind. The boys were back home for the weekend between treatments, their vitals stable, their energy slowly returning. She stood at the stove, flipping pancakes the way her mother taught her. Plain for Kamari, chocolate chip for Khalil. The sizzle in the pan grounded her more than coffee ever could. "Mom," Kamari called from the living room, "is Mr. Nate coming today?" Layla paused. "He might stop by." "Good," Khalil added. "He said he'd bring the other puzzle." Layla bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. He said he'd bring it. He didn't promise. He didn't overreach. He didn't act like family, but kept showing up like one. By noon, Nate arrived, not in a luxury car or with security, just him, in jeans, a dark jacket, and a box of puzzles under one arm. Layla opened the door. "You're early. Habit. You had none of those when we dated." He smiled. "Maybe that's why it didn't work." She moved aside. "They're inside." Nate greeted the boys like it was normal, as if this were always part of the routine. They pulled him straight to the floor with excitement. Layla watched as he let Kamari explain the puzzle rules, even when they were wrong. He didn't correct. He encouraged. There was something deeply human in how he knelt. Unrushed, humble, engaged. No boardroom could have taught that. Later, Layla poured tea while the boys colored at the dining table. Nate joined her in the kitchen. The two of them separated only by the counter. "You're good with them?" she said. "I like them. That's not the same as being good with them." He paused. "They're smart, observant, funny. You did well." She didn't expect the compliment to sting. "I did what I had to." "I didn't mean that as praise," he said gently. "I meant it as acknowledgement. You raised them to trust people slowly. That takes intention." She met his gaze. No heat, no flirting, just quiet respect. It hit deeper than anything else would have. That afternoon, Kamari grew tired and lay down. Khalil followed a few minutes later. Layla dimmed the lights and walked into the kitchen to start dinner. Nate stayed behind, watching the boys sleep. "Do you want to eat here?" she asked from the doorway. He turned. "Only if it's okay with you." She nodded. They made dinner together, unspoken rhythm returning, him chopping, her seasoning, the way they used to, before their plans tore in different directions. Midway through cooking, she glanced at him. "You never ask questions." "I try not to overstep." "But don't you want to?" "I do," he said, "but wanting and deserving aren't always the same." That sentence sat with her longer than she expected. After dinner, while the boys slept on the couch, Layla offered Nate a blanket for the drive. He hesitated, then asked, "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Depends on what? On whether this is a phase, or something you'll still choose when it's not convenient." Nate's voice didn't waver. "I've had convenient. It didn't teach me anything." She handed him the blanket. "Then we'll see you at noon." The next morning, Layla woke to a note on her porch. It wasn't flour, not a gift, just a folded sheet of paper, weighed down by a smooth rock. "Layla, I'm not asking for space in your life. I'm just staying near it, in case there's ever room." She stood on the porch for a long time, the cold numbing her fingers, the boys still asleep inside. She didn't move. She didn't smile. But for the first time in years, she felt the difference between loneliness and quiet. And it no longer scared her. Have you ever had someone show up, not with promises, but with presence? When trust has been broken, do you believe it can be rebuilt through consistency? Not words. Let us know in the comments. And if this story speaks to something you've lived or learned from, subscribe for more emotionally honest stories on Romance Stories with Mr. Daniel. Rain dotted the glass outside the clinic as Layla sat beside Kamari's recovery bed, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest. The treatment had left him groggy, his arm bandaged from the latest infusion. Khalil was in the hallway with a nurse, proudly explaining a math problem he'd solved during his scan. Layla smoothed Kamari's blanket, then rested her hand on his back. She never used to sit still like this. Stillness always made her feel unproductive, but lately it felt like a necessity, a choice to notice instead of brace. Nate hadn't arrived yet. That felt strange, not because she expected him, but because lately she'd stopped expecting anyone, and he kept showing up anyway. When he walked in, an hour later, she was in the hallway reviewing discharge notes. "Sorry, I'm late," he said, slightly out of breath. Board call ran long. "You don't owe me a HIB card." "I know," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. Still wanted to say it. They walked together toward the lounge. No words for a few minutes. The quiet felt familiar now. Easier, When they reached the coffee machine, she spoke first. We never had the big conversation. He looked at her about why you really left. Why I didn't stop you. What we pretended we didn't feel. He nodded. Do you want it now? I don't know, she admitted, but I think we've earned it. They found an empty consultation room. She sat first. Nate stood, then slowly took the chair across from her. No desk between them. No white coats. Just years. I left because I was scared, he began. Not of work or failure. I was scared of becoming someone ordinary. Someone who didn't reach the edge of everything. She watched him carefully. I thought if I stayed, I'd lose momentum. And that if you loved me, you'd understand. I did understand, she said quietly. But I also needed to be seen. Not as the woman who supported you, but as someone with her own path. Her own pain. He nodded slowly. I didn't know how to see both, he said. You and my dream. I thought one would swallow the other, and I didn't know how to ask you to stay, she replied. Because I believed asking made me weak, and I couldn't afford to feel weak. Not with my mother sick, not with school, not with everything else falling apart. They sat in that honesty for a while. The room didn't feel heavy. It felt cleared. Nate leaned forward. I never stopped wondering who you became. Layla didn't flinch. And now I see someone who did it all. Even the parts I never had the strength for. I see someone who finally slowed down, she said. I had to. Fast never brought me anything worth keeping. Layla exhaled. Steady. I don't want to go back. I wouldn't ask you to, Nate said. But I would like to know who you are now. Not for what we had, for what we could rebuild. As friends. Or just two people who matter again. There was no answer in that room. Just the beginning of a new question. Later that day, as Layla drove home, the boys asleep in the back seat, she thought about how grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's missed milestones. Sometimes it's silence during triumphs. Sometimes it's the way your chest tightens when someone asks if you're okay, and you don't know how to answer. She glanced in the rear-view mirror at their faces. Soft, innocent, tired. They were worth every quiet heartbreak she had walked through. And if Nathaniel was willing to learn how to stay, really stay, then maybe, just maybe, this time, she didn't have to hold everything alone. 3 days after the talk, Layla found herself standing outside Nate's office. Not out of necessity, but choice. The boys were stable, their vitals holding, side effects manageable. For the first time in weeks, there was no immediate crisis. Still, she came. She knocked lightly. The glass door slid open. Nate looked up from his laptop, surprised. I wasn't expecting you. I wasn't expecting to come. He stood. You want to sit? She nodded. He offered tea. She took it. Neither commented on the routine they'd fallen into. This time, she spoke first. "You're good at staying quiet. Sometimes it's the only way not to break what's healing." Layla's fingers curled around her cup. "I don't need saving, Nathan. I know, and I don't need a second chance at romance. I know that, too. What do you want from me?" He met her eyes. "Respect, time, and maybe, someday, a seat at the table when the boys talk about who showed up." That caught her breath. Not because it was romantic, because it was true. That night, she returned to the guest house. Kamari was reading. Khalil was drawing on the back of his vitals chart. "Did Mr. Nate come today?" Kamari asked. "He did. Did he stay long?" "No," she said. "But long enough." Khalil looked up. "Is he our friend now?" She considered that. "I think he's learning how to be." The next morning, Nate texted her. "Board is asking if I'll accept the Public Leadership Award for Callahan's medical contributions this year." Layla stared at the message. She replied, "Do you want it?" A pause. "Then I used to. Now I want the work to matter more than the recognition." She responded, "Then decline it." Another beat passed. "Will be upset if I do. I'll be disappointed if you don't mean it." An hour later, the news dropped. Callahan Biotech declined the nomination. Layla didn't need the headline. She already knew who he was becoming. That afternoon, she sat with him on the back patio again. The boys were playing in the yard. Leaves scattered around them. Autumn fading. "You could have taken the award," she said. "I didn't need it. Old you would have taken it. Old me thought applause meant arrival. New me knows that arrival looks more like folding laundry, while your son is throwing up in the other room." She chuckled softly. "You're not there yet." "I'm not," he agreed. "But I'm closer than I was." She leaned back, let herself breathe. "Some days I still flinch when things are quiet," she admitted. "Because quiet used to mean something bad was coming." He turned toward her. "And now I'm learning that quiet doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it just means peace." Nate didn't fill the silence. He let it land. Let it stay. Later that evening, he stayed for dinner. Not the whole night. Not out of obligation. Just long enough to help Kamari with a riddle and convince Khalil that spinach didn't mean betrayal. When he left, he didn't linger. He said, "Thank you for letting me be here." Layla only said, "We'll see you soon. Not tomorrow, nah again, but soon." He understood what that meant. The trouble started with a cough. At first, it was soft, barely noticeable. Kamari brushed it off with a wave of his hand and a sleepy smile. But by noon, he was flushed, coughing harder, the kind that came from the lungs. Deep. Wrong. Layla's instincts screamed louder than the monitors. They rushed him in. Nate arrived before she called. He walked straight into the ER. No security. No pause. And asked for Kamari's attending by name. Layla didn't ask how he knew who to call. He stayed beside her as the nurses prepped fluids, tested vitals, increased oxygen flow. Then came the numbers: elevated white blood cell count, oxygen saturation dipping. The treatment was working, but it was also making Kamari's system vulnerable. Now it was reacting. "I need to see your lead research director," Layla said. "She's on the way," Nate said. The doctor looked at them both. "We may have to halt his current dosage if his immune system is destabilizing this fast." "No," Layla said. "This therapy is giving him a chance. I need every option. Everything you've run in preclinical." Nate spoke next. "There's a backup formula. Option B. It hasn't been released to the field team yet." The doctor hesitated. "That would require board approval." Nate's voice was steady. "You have mine protocol. I said you have my approval. Draft the emergency request. I'll sign it." Layla didn't speak to him until they were alone in the hallway, outside the ICU. "You're not on the trial board. I'm the CEO. I made the board. That's not how medical ethics works. That's how this one does. You could lose your license." "Nate, don't care." Her chest tightened. "You're risking everything." He looked her dead in the eye. "So are you. Every time you walk into that room with them. Every time you choose the hard option. Let me do the same." Layla pressed her back against the wall. The hallway buzzed faintly with fluorescent lights. Her heart pounded against her ribs. "I don't want to." "Oh, you won't. You're not their father. I know. You don't get to act like you've earned this." "I'm not trying to earn anything," he said quietly. "I'm trying not to walk away when someone needs me. Not again." The backup therapy was administered within 2 hours. Kamari responded slowly, but he responded. The fever dropped by midnight. His oxygen levels climbed. By morning, he was sleeping with color in his face again. Layla sat beside his bed, holding his hand loosely. Nate was across the room, slumped in the armchair, awake but still. She looked over at him. "You should sleep." "I can't." "Neither can I." They sat in that silence again. This one felt different. Not full of questions. Not full of grief. This silence was earned. At 6:42 a.m., the attending nurse checked Kamari's vitals. Stable, Layla's legs gave slightly beneath her. Nate stood quickly, reaching out. She let him, just for a moment. She leaned her forehead into his shoulder. No crying, no shaking, just stillness. She pulled back after 3 seconds. Maybe 4, but he didn't move until she did. Later in the cafeteria, he bought her toast and tea. She stared at the plate. I can feed myself. You don't have to. I don't like needing help. I'm not asking you to. She looked up at him. Then why are you still here? Because I want to be. Because I can be. Because I'm finally learning what being present looks like. That night, when she and the boys returned to the guest house, she found her bed made, groceries put away, a sticky note on the fridge. In case you're too tired to keep pretending you're fine. She stood in the kitchen, the boys already asleep upstairs, and stared at the note longer than she meant to. She didn't throw it out. She didn't message him, but she left the note where it was. The next morning, the house was still. Kamari slept late, his body still recovering. Khalil, unusually subdued, sat at the kitchen table coloring in silence. Layla made toast and eggs, watching her son with gentle eyes. You okay? She asked. Khalil shrugged. Is Mr. Nate coming today? She hesitated. Maybe, he nodded, still coloring. He sits different now. Layla paused. What do you mean? When he's here, he doesn't look like he's waiting for anything. He just stays. Layla didn't answer, but her heart did. By noon, Nate arrived with grocery bags. Not loud, not flashy. He let himself in, through the back, like he'd done it 100 times. Layla think. She didn't turn. You have work. I'm working later. I moved a meeting. Why? Because I wanted to cook for you. She looked over her shoulder. That's not necessary. I know, he said. But neither is coming back to a hospital room after midnight, just to sit in a chair while a child you're not related to fights through a fever. That stilled her. He placed the bags on the counter, pulled out tomatoes, garlic, chicken broth, lemons. Simple, fresh, familiar. She watched as he set things in order, washed his hands, rolled up his sleeves, not for show, just because that's what people who stay do. They cooked side by side. He chopped onions. She stirred the pot. Their elbows bumped twice, and neither pulled away. The kitchen filled with a kind of silence that made space, not tension. When the food simmered, he looked at her. I'm not trying to win points. I know I'm not trying to get back what we had. I know that too. But I do want something. She met his gaze. What? A chance to show the boys that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's folding towels, or remembering who hates pepper, or reading manuals on medical trial structure, because you don't want to say the wrong thing in front of their mother. Layla's throat tightened. You read the trial manual. Twice, she turned back to the stove. You're ridiculous. I'm aware. After lunch, he helped Khalil clean up a spilled cup of juice. Kamari stayed curled on the couch, sleepy but smiling at the scent of broth. Layla sat nearby with a book she wasn't reading. When Nate moved to leave, she stood to walk him out. At the door, she paused. "I meant it before," she said. "I don't need saving. I never thought you did." "But," she added, slower now, "I also know I've built a life where I don't let anyone close enough to notice the cracks." He nodded. "I see them anyway. Not because I'm looking, but because I remember what you looked like before you learned to hide." That stunned her into silence. "I won't push," he said, gently, "but I'll stay available." Layla took a breath. That's a hard promise to keep. "I've kept harder ones." He stepped back, hands in his pockets. "Do you want me to come tomorrow?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Bring breakfast," she said, "but no coffee. I'm switching to tea again." He smiled. "Lemon or mint?" "Mint, no sugar." "Got it." That night, after the boys fell asleep, Layla stood in the doorway of their shared room, watching their chests rise and fall in rhythm. Her hands weren't shaking. Her heart wasn't racing. She was calm, not because things were perfect, but because she finally wasn't carrying everything alone. In the stillness of the living room, she picked up the sticky note from the fridge, the one Nate left. She didn't need it anymore, but instead of throwing it away, she folded it, placed it inside her wallet. Not because it meant anything permanent, but because it meant something real. The boys were healing. Not completely, not quickly, but their smiles came easier now. Their laughter wasn't followed by coughs. Their energy lasted past lunch. Kamari spent more time upright, even cracking jokes again. Khalil had taken to journaling. Small, serious reflections in a spiral-bound notebook Layla found beside his bed each night. Layla, for once, wasn't surviving. She was living, still wary, still waiting, but breathing with less weight on her chest. Nate hadn't missed a day in 2 weeks. He didn't overstay. He didn't show up empty. He came with groceries, jokes, printouts of new research updates. He came with calm. That Friday night, the boys fell asleep early. Layla stepped onto the back patio, a blanket around her shoulders, her tea still warm in her hand. Nate was already out there, a book in his lap, glasses on the bridge of his nose. She never remembered him wearing when they were younger. He looked over. "I started without you. What are we reading?" "Still finishing that report on immune markers." She smiled faintly. "Of course you are." He set the papers aside and pulled a real book from beside his chair. "Actually brought this too," he said. "Figured I'd read something that doesn't end in footnotes." She sat down in the other chair. "What is it?" He held up the cover. "Fiction. Something gentle." "No, tech." not data. Trying to make space in my brain for things that don't come with consequences, he said. She looked at him, surprised. You always said fiction was a waste of time. I was wrong. It's helping me see things that facts never showed me. Layla sipped her tea. Like what? He paused. That there's a difference between being present and being available. I used to think showing up when needed was enough. Now I know. Being present means seeing the things no one says. She looked at him. You think you see me? More than I ever did. They sat in the quiet. No music. No phones, just the light hum of night. You used to talk all the time, she said. You used to never stop moving. They both smiled. Maybe we needed time to learn how to be still, he said. Maybe we needed different lessons. I think we're learning the same one now. What's that? He looked at her, not through her, not around her. Direct, calm, present. That love doesn't always have to speak to be real. Layla held his gaze for a beat too long, then looked away, not in fear, but in awareness. She wasn't ready to answer, but she didn't need to deny it either. A minute passed. Then 2. She shifted, adjusting the blanket, but didn't move away. You're not going to try to kiss me, are you? She said, lightly. No? You're not going to ask me how I feel? Nope. You're not going to bring up the past again. I think we've both carried it far enough. She nodded. Good. Then, after a moment, she added, but if I asked you to stay longer, you would? He didn't hesitate. Yes, they didn't touch. But when she finally rose to go back inside, she left the door open behind her. And when he followed, it wasn't because he expected anything. It was because he'd been invited. The following week unfolded in small, quiet moments. Nothing dramatic. No big confessions. No emotional setbacks. And somehow, that unsettled Layla more than crisis ever did. She was used to surviving, knowing what to fix, how to move, what needed control. But safety, stillness, letting someone help without proving themselves again. That was new. That was unfamiliar. One evening, while folding the boys' laundry, she found a piece of paper tucked into the pocket of Kamari's pajama pants. It was a drawing. Nate, Kamari, Khalil, and her. 4 stick figures, all holding hands. A big sun overhead. In Kamari's crooked handwriting, the caption read, Us, with Mr. Nate. He has big shoes. Layla stared at it, longer than she meant to. Big shoes. She didn't know if Kamari meant it literally or not. But either way, he wasn't wrong. That night, the boys were restless. The treatment was shifting again. Different side effects. More headaches, nausea, Short tempers. Layla moved through the house like a nurse with a checklist. Medication at 9. Ice pack at 11. Fluids every 2 hours. Nate arrived with warm broth. Extra ginger. He didn't ask what she needed. He just set the pot down and started helping Khalil brush his teeth while Layla tried to soothe Kamari's stomach. By midnight, the boys were asleep. The lights dimmed, and she sank into the couch, not for comfort, but because her knees finally gave out. Nate came in quietly, saw her, didn't speak. He walked to the kitchen, returned with a cup of water, a fresh cloth for her forehead, sat beside her. She didn't speak either. He didn't leave. I forgot how exhausting it is, she said eventually. The kind of tired that doesn't leave your bones. You carry everything. I'm afraid if I stop, it'll all fall. What if it doesn't? He asked. What if it does, and I can't fix it? Then you let someone else stand beside the broken pieces, he said. She turned to him slowly. You're saying that like it's easy. I'm saying it like I've broken things alone before. And it didn't make me stronger. It just made me lonely. Layla looked down at her hands. The hands that had fed, lifted, wiped, written, steadied, and protected for 8 long years without help. She didn't cry, but she breathed deep for the first time in days. He stayed on the couch, never asked to move closer, never touched her without invitation. Around 3 a.m., Kamari called out for water. Layla stood. Nate did too. They walked down the hallway together. 2 people who once planned a future, now just navigating the pieces of a present. They reached the boys' room. Nate stood at the door, while Layla offered the water. Kamari blinked at her sleepily. Is Mr. Nate still here? Yes. Kamari smiled faintly. Good. He turned and drifted back to sleep. Layla turned back to Nate. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Back in the living room, she handed him a pillow from the linen closet. If you're going to stay sometimes, she said, you should at least have a proper cushion. Nate accepted it. This means I'm allowed to fall asleep now. This means you're allowed to stop pretending you're here just for work. He smiled, small and grateful. Layla turned out the lamp, and for once, there was no heaviness in sharing space, just peace and quiet. Present. Layla didn't know when it happened. When Nate went from visitor to constant. It wasn't a conversation. No one asked. No one announced it. But the shift was real. He came every morning on weekends, sometimes Fridays. By Sunday night, he'd leave after tucking the boys in. Always quiet. Always on time. Always without asking for more than the day gave. She didn't give him a drawer, but he had a space on the coat rack. She didn't call it anything, but it felt like something. Khalil started telling people at school. My mom's friend, Nate, picks me up sometimes, Kamari said. He knows how to cook and spell diarrhea without help. They didn't ask if Nate was their father. They didn't ask if he would be. They just let him belong in the way kids do, by routine. Layla didn't explain him. She just noticed that the house felt different when he wasn't in it. Not worse, not empty, but quieter than she liked. One Saturday, she found him sitting outside with Kamari and Khalil, showing them how to repot the aloe plant by the back window. Khalil had gloves too big for his hands. Kamari had dirt on his cheek. Layla watched through the kitchen window, unseen. Nate didn't lecture. He didn't make it the lesson. He let them do most of the work, stepped in gently when something needed correction, and stayed quiet when they were focused. That's when she understood something she hadn't wanted to say out loud. He wasn't just filling space anymore. He was creating safety. That scared her. That evening, as the boys watched a movie, she asked him, "When does this stop feeling temporary?" He looked up from the couch. "What? This? Here?" He didn't answer right away. "Then, when you stop waiting for it to disappear." She folded laundry on the table. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." Layla held up one of Kamari's socks. "You know what the hardest part of this is?" "What?" "I don't know if I believe that love can come back and not ask to be forgiven." Nate nodded slowly. "I'm not asking to be forgiven." She looked at him. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm learning how to be in your life without needing to be the center of it." That stilled her hands. Later that night, he stood in the doorway, jacket over his arm. "I can stay if you want." Layla leaned against the wall. "You always ask at the door. You always hesitate, because I need to know that this version of you isn't temporary." He didn't move closer. "I'm still here, Layla." "I know," she said, "but I'm not ready to trust that." Then he nodded. "I'll be back in the morning." When he left, she sat in the quiet for a long time. The boys were asleep. The house was still, and she realized her fear wasn't of him leaving. It was of her finally letting him stay. By Sunday morning, Layla had already made up her mind. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't write it down. But when Nate rang the doorbell at 8:03 a.m. with muffins in one hand and a paperback under his arm, she let him in without hesitation. No nerves, no second-guessing, just quiet agreement. The boys cheered like he brought fireworks. Nate handed over the muffins, sat on the floor, and started reading aloud from the book, something silly and magical and far from hospital reports. Layla poured tea in the kitchen, listening from the other room. She didn't realize how much she had needed this stability that asked for nothing in return. Later that afternoon, the boys built a pillow fort. Nate joined without hesitation, crawling on the floor like he'd never worn a suit, or sat on panels, or made decisions that shaped medical futures. He wore cardboard armor and called himself Sir Nate of cough syrup. Kamari laughed until he wheezed. Layla watched from the couch. This wasn't a man who had come to prove something. This was someone who had come to be with them. That mattered more. After dinner, as the sky turned soft and the boys lay under blankets on the couch, Nate stood in the kitchen with Layla, helping her load dishes. "I used to think love was about intensity," she said, drying a glass. "Big gestures, grand plans, emotional declarations." He nodded. "Same, but now I think maybe it's about the everyday. Not the speech, but the silence. Not the moments people see, but the ones they never do. Like helping a kid cut strawberries with dull scissors. Exactly. They stood in that quiet. Then she said, "You're good at being invisible when it matters." "I'm trying to be useful without needing to be noticed." That used to be the opposite of who you were. Later that night, as Nate prepared to leave, Layla walked him to the door again. But this time, she didn't stop at the threshold. She stepped outside with him, arms folded. They stood under the porch light. No wind, no words. Then she said, "You've become someone I'd want my boys to look up to." Nate blinked. "That means more than anything else you could have said." "I know." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small item, and pressed it into his hand. His brow furrowed. It was Kamari's latest drawing, this time with Nate labeled as Mr. Safe. He swallowed. "Layla." She shook her head. "Don't say anything." He nodded. She stepped back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. That night, after the boys fell asleep, Layla sat on the edge of her bed and opened her journal. She wrote one sentence. "He didn't rescue me. He respected me, and that, more than anything, was why she was still here." It was Thursday when the trial doctor said the words Layla hadn't let herself hope for. "The response is holding. The boys are stable." Layla didn't cry in the room. She nodded, asked follow-up questions, clarified dosages, confirmed the next check in schedule. But when she stepped into the hallway, she had to lean against the wall. For the first time in nearly 6 months, she wasn't bracing for the worst. That evening, she told the boys over dinner. Kamari blinked. "So, we're okay?" Layla smiled. "You're better than okay. You're stronger." Khalil looked over at Nate. "Does this mean Mr. Nate doesn't have to come over anymore?" The room went still. Layla looked at Nate. Nate looked at her. Then Kamari added, "I mean, he already lives here." "Kind of." Layla raised an eyebrow. "Kind of? You have a toothbrush in the guest bathroom," Kamari explained. Khalil nodded. "Your own towel." Layla stifled a laugh. "You two are observant." "We're not babies," Khalil said. "No," Layla replied. You're not. Then she turned to Nate. So? Does this mean you disappear now that the crisis is over? He didn't flinch. No. It means I get to stay without reason. If that's something you'll allow. Her voice was steady. I don't want someone who stays out of duty. I'm not here because of the boys anymore, Nate said. I'm here because this, you, is where I feel most human. That night, after bedtime, Layla and Nate sat on the porch again. This time, she was the one who brought the tea. She handed him his mug and sat beside him without needing to say anything first. They listened to the wind, the soft hum of distant traffic, the night moving around them like a blanket that didn't smother. Finally, she spoke. You don't need permission anymore. He turned his head slowly. What do you mean? You're not someone I'm tolerating, or testing, or waiting to outgrow. He didn't move. I don't know if I'll ever say the words the way you probably want to hear them, she added. I don't need a script, he said. But if you're still showing up this way a year from now, you won't need to ask if you belong. Nate swallowed hard. Okay, he said. Just that. Not thank you. Not the first love you. Just presence. And that was enough. Later that night, as they stood in the hallway outside the boys' room, Layla touched his arm. He looked down at her hand. I'm not scared anymore, she said. Not of the treatments. Not of the silence. Not of letting someone stay. Nate's reply came in a whisper. Neither am I. They didn't kiss. Not that night. But when she rested her head on his chest before going to bed, it was the first time she let her body fully lean against someone else. Her knees didn't buckle. They rested because she did. 2 months later, the routine remained, though the urgency had softened. No more late-night hospital runs. No fevers. No emergency scans. Instead, school drop-offs, puzzle nights, movie weekends, laughter with fewer interruptions, rest with fewer fears. The boys were thriving. Layla noticed it in the way Kamari no longer hesitated before climbing stairs, in how Khalil smiled while reading instead of frowning in fatigue, in how they argued again over board games, cereal, space on the couch. Normal, a word she'd stopped trusting, now slowly being redefined. Nate never asked to move in. He never pushed for declarations, but every weekend he was there, with groceries, with warm hands, with patience. And one Saturday morning, while fixing the boys' breakfast, Khalil asked, "Do we get to keep him?" Layla froze. Nate looked up from the waffle iron. "That depends on what?" Kamari asked. "On whether I keep showing up, and your mom keeps letting me." Layla didn't say anything right away. Then, "You're doing okay so far." The boys high-fived like they'd won a prize. Nate only smiled. He didn't gloat. He didn't reach for her hand. He just returned to the waffles. And that enough. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Layla found Nate in the backyard, sitting on the steps with Khalil asleep beside him. She walked over quietly, sat beside them. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd let someone this close again." Nate didn't move. "No, I thought if I ever did, it would be big, dramatic, sudden. Instead, it's been quiet," he said, "almost too quiet." He looked at her. "Want me to make noise?" She laughed under her breath. "Please, don't." They watched the sky shift. A bird passed overhead. Somewhere, a dog barked. A child called out down the street. And still, they sat. Layla's voice dropped low. "You're not the man I thought you'd become." "I'm not," he agreed, "but I like the man. I became better than the one I thought I had to be." She turned toward him. "I like him, too." No grand kiss, no cue for music, but she leaned her head on his shoulder again, like she had weeks before. This time, it wasn't a moment of exhaustion. It was trust. Inside, Kamari peeked out the window, then whispered to his brother, "They're sitting close again." Khalil grinned. "Told you. He's staying." That night, Nate read the boys their bedtime story. Layla stood by the door, arms crossed, not in judgment, but peace. The boys asked for 2 more pages. He read 3, then tucked them now, one by one. No rush. When he stepped into the hallway, Layla was still there. "You're getting good at that," she said. "I'm practicing for the long term." "Good," she said, "because you're not going anywhere." His breath caught just slightly. She stepped closer. No announcement, no hesitation, just a single touch, her fingers resting over his. Finally, present, rushed, real. 1 year later, Layla stood near the edge of the community garden, behind the local health center, clipboard in hand, hair tied back, sun low behind her. Kids ran between planter beds, picking basil and tomatoes, laughing too loudly. Parents stood nearby, some single, some married, some still figuring it out. The nonprofit, Bridge Care, was officially a year old. It wasn't flashy, wasn't global, but it helped families like hers navigate hard systems with softer hands. Layla adjusted the tablecloth under the juice pitchers, checked the printed schedules for workshops, waved at Kamari and Khalil, who were helping carry folding chairs. She turned just as Nate approached, sleeves rolled, a small tool bag in hand. "Fence gates fixed," he said. She smiled. "So are we." He leaned in. "Speak for yourself. I'm still learning how to fold your event banners the correct way. You'll get there. Later that afternoon, during closing remarks, one of the parents stood up and said, "I came here thinking this was just a place to learn about navigating healthcare. But I learned how to stand up for myself too." Layla felt the tears threaten, but held them back. That night, after the crowd cleared and the cleanup was done, the four of them walked home slowly. No rush, no lists. Kamari and Khalil raced ahead. Layla and Nate strolled behind, fingers lightly brushing. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm full." He waited. "I used to think love was something you earned," she said, "like a performance. You show up, you give, you prove. And now I think real love just stays. Especially when no one's watching." Nate didn't reply. He only nodded. And that night, as the boys fell asleep in their room, and Layla turned out the lights, she paused at the doorway. Nate stood behind her, brushing her hand with his gently. She turned, not to ask for anything, not to declare anything, but to rest her forehead against his and whisper, "I see you." And he whispered back, "I'm still here." When someone re-enters your life, not with promises, but with quiet consistency, would you let them share your thoughts in the comments? And subscribe to Romance Stories with Mr. Daniel for more stories that remind you, love doesn't have to be loud to be real.